Welcome everyone to this episode of A Story Always, in which we have the great pleasure of having with us William Akers, the author of Comrades, as well as the writer, as a writer, editor for the narratively website playwright for Squeaky Bicycle, and today mainly we're going to be talking about his new game, which is currently being kickstarted right now, called Comrades. So to begin with, I want to remind people that if they have any questions and they are so lucky as to be able to watch this live, they can leave the questions on the chat, and I'll do my best to try to bring them to William. And also, if you want to support the channel, if you want to support eHostel Roll and help us continue doing this kind of content, you can share it around on social media. You can give us likes on whatever. You can subscribe on Twitch with your Prime subscription for free, or you can give us a few bucks on our coffee page, which is you will should be able to find that in the underneath here somewhere, I believe. So yeah, but to begin with, first of all, welcome, William. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here.
So to begin the interview, I thought you could just give us a quick pitch, a quick introduction about Comrades. What is it about? What should we know about it? And in the meantime, I'm going to send all the links on the chat.
Great. So Comrades is a tabletop role-playing game about life in the revolutionary underground. It's based on the Apocalypse World system, which is the same system that gave us Monster Hearts, Dungeon World, obviously Apocalypse World, Night Witches, Worldwide Wrestling. It's a really versatile, simple, easy-to-use system, which has been responsible for a million different games. What attracted me to it is that it's really perfectly designed for games about small groups of people who are in very tight quarters working against, some sort of larger foe. In this case, the larger foe is an oppressive government. So Comrades is about a small group of revolutionaries in any setting, any time period that interests players, could be real, imaginary, historical, whatever, trying to destroy an oppressive government. And how they do it is up to them.
Great. So to begin with, talking a little bit about you and about your background, the first question will be something like, what you will receive, I guess, in social media, something like, what are you, some kind of communist? Meaning, how did you become interested in political activism and revolutionary struggle? Where that interest came from?
So I've been really interested in mostly revolutionary history since I was in high school. I just devoured like the whole library book, shelf about the Russian Revolution, and the Spanish Civil War, and anything kind of in that vein. And for a long time, I've been trying to kind of interrogate in myself, what is it about these stories that attract me and that interest me? And also, despite the fact that a lot of the people you meet in them are extremely problematic characters, to say the least, what is it about these figures that, like, even when my head disagrees with both their actions and their politics, what is it about what they did and the stories that are told about them that continues to excite my imagination and sort of trigger that like romantic impulse in me. And I think the sort of unifying thread, and you find it in any kind of story about a revolution, whether it's like leftist revolutionaries of the 20th century, or even going back to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, whatever, is that you get small groups of really intense, tightly knit people, often from very different backgrounds, who are working together for the sake of an ideal, and who are willing to risk life and limb and for the sake of something that to other people seems impossible or insane. And I just think that that idealism and that passion, even when it's entirely misguided, or even when what it results in is a total catastrophe, is the sort of thing that attracts me to fictional characters and real life characters in all sorts of topics. So I came to this, like I come to everything, which is from a writer's perspective, and it's just these are stories that have inspired and excited me for 20 years. And about 2 years ago, when I got really serious about game design, after I finished making this baseball game called Deadball, which has just
Mm.
absolutely nothing to do with this content, but which is very fun if you like baseball. I was reading a new biography of Stalin by Stephen Kotkin, which is extremely interesting and very, very well done, and does a really good job of sort of giving the feel for what the landscape was like amongst the Russian revolutionary underground in the late 19th and early 20th century. And the short version of it is that it was a total mess. And we look back on it, and all we see are the Bolsheviks and, you know, the things that they did. And, you know, we see the sort of like tip of the spear. And it was so interesting to go back and see that the Russian Revolution Underground had existed for close to 100 years in various forms. And there had been, you know, anarchists and like agrarian socialists and, you know, just like every different possible stripe of socialists who in the second half of the 19th century were fighting really, really hard for what they believed in. And it's that book, and then there was a new biography of Lenin that came out last year by, or his name down, Victor Sebastian. They both do a really, really good job of just showing the kind of like melting pot of all of these different underground societies who are all being targeted by the secret police, and we're all fighting with each other and feuding with each other. And it just that atmosphere of intense like deception and infighting and anger and passion like really got under my skin. And I was just like, this feels like a game. This feels like these are stories that I think people are going to want to tell, and I want to help them tell these stories. And so that was the like intellectual component, the sort of like gut component that maybe that really like lit the fire that made me want to do it, is just like how intensely angry I am about politics, particularly in the United States in 2019, for reasons that perhaps I don't need to get into because I think most people kind of could guess why. But just the feeling of like spending all day walking around the streets. I live in Brooklyn, just like walking around the streets, riding the subway, and like sitting in my house, just like every, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes being like, the president's a fascist. Like, we let white supremacists back. Like, we're doing this again. Like, fascism is not like a bad word in this country anymore. Just like being so angry about that all the time in a way that is extremely dull to talk to people about. You know, so this is like a thing that I do not bore my wife with, because if every time I thought about how angry this makes me, I told someone, it would usually be my wife, and she would get very impatient and bored with me very quickly, which is what I'm always trying to avoid. So just like several years now, just being so angry about that all the time and needing an outlet for it, I was just like, this is the thing. And so I just channeled all of that anger and all of that rage into this game with the hope that people could take it and use it to process their feelings about the political situation in 2019. I almost said 1919, although you could use it for that too. And, you know, hopefully take that sort of impotent anger and then turn it into something first constructive and then also fun, because now instead of just like sitting around your house literally fuming, you're hanging out with your friends and you're laughing and you're processing this stuff in like a more constructive way. And I think that once people can start doing that, then they can take those feelings and hopefully bring them out into the real world and make change with them.
Do you think the left and the people have kind of lost that impetus of getting out into the street, compromising, like fighting for the ideals at the level, at the way they did back in the day? Has that to some degree disappeared or been reduced, or has the left become tame?
I think, well, actually, it's appropriate to ask that, because the title of the introduction to the book is "When Did the Left Forget How to Fight?" And I think, and you know, mostly I can speak to the left in the United States, and I think that in this country, at least, and I think in other places too, people on the left have fallen victim to believing the lies that people in the center and people on the right tell about them. And you know, when the messaging is always like, you know, if you're on the left, it means you're weak, it means you're too idealistic, it means you're hopeless, it means you're probably overeducated, got your head in the clouds, you don't know what you're doing, like nobody cares about what you have to say. I think people on the left have really internalized that to a large degree, and so they have sort of fallen for this right-wing lie that they're wimps because they believe in something, because they care about something, because they care about other people and want to help them and want to make the world a better place. And part of the sort of my goal for this game was to harken back to a moment where that was not the stereotype, where 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, where the stereotype was like, people on the left are intense, people on the left are crazy, they're dangerous. They've got big, dangerous ideas, and they'll do whatever it takes to, make them reality. And like, that's the thing that I want to help bring back with this. I'm not like, yeah, and I think that is a thing that hopefully just like telling these stories with each other and like living in this past for a few hours a week or a month or however often you get to play. I think that is a thing that can have a tangible effect and just remind you that because you believe in something, because you care about other people, that doesn't make you a woman, it makes you very brave and very tough, and that's like a thing that you can hang on
to. How do you think we became disconnected from radical activism? Like, because I think back to just like the 70s even, and you see things like the Black Panthers, like fighting the police, policing the police, like creating hospitals and that kind of stuff. And I see here in UK like the miners striking. Like there was, and you could see the connection between what they were doing and the historical context where they were coming from. Like they hadn't, like they knew they were part of a historical struggle. But I think my impression is that somehow we have lost that. How do you think that happened? Like, when did that happen?
The 90s. I blame the 90s. You can blame the 90s for everything, I think that there was a long period where people on the left sort of fell into the trap of, the seduction of the center, of being like, listen, if I put the stuff that I really care about on hold, like, these, like, the people in the center are people who kind of agree with me, and they kind of talk like me, and they kind of look like me. And like, if we let them take the reins, then it will get us toward the direction of where we want to go. And, so you have this period in the 90s when like the Democratic Party and, the Labor Party were like on the upswing, and it really seemed like, maybe things were moving in the right direction, but really it was just sort of a period of intellectual stagnation. And, I think that's the moment, at least, from my reading of it, and, that's just my perspective. I think that's the moment when it sort of went slack.
So kind of talking about how to try to fight that off and reverse it, what role do you think art and games play in inspiring, in raising or inspiring revolutionary consciousness?
So I think that particularly a game like this, I think that the biggest thing you can take away from it is that this is a place where, for however many hours you can sit down and play it, you don't have to be reasonable. I think that people on the left, it's really, really important to us to be reasonable and to be sensible and to listen to other people and to, hear what they have to say and to think about it and to like think about how other people are going to react before we talk. And all that's really, really important. But I think that there are also, it is useful to have times when you can play a character who just cares about what's right and just cares about what they believe in and is going to go after it no matter what. And so I think it could be useful. The game opens with, there's this manifesto that all of the player characters, the comrades, are supposed to live by, and the 3 points are fight. So whatever it is that you believe in, fight for it tooth and nail, and be willing to risk your life for it, and die for it gloriously or not. And number 2 is refuse compromise. Compromise is a thing that's very important in real life. In a game, you don't need it. Forget it. Like, play as somebody who's just going to like go for what they want all out. And point 3 is don't let the bastards get away with it. And so just, whatever the thing in real life where you see it and, you can't stop it, or you've tried to stop it and you fail, just whatever it is in the game, like, don't let them get away with it. Like, go after it 100%. And I think that getting to embody those kinds of people in a game, can just like have the effect of when you go back to real life and you're in a situation where you do have to compromise and you do have to be reasonable and you have to think about other people, and how they feel and what they want and all of that very important human being type stuff. Just having the memory of like, but earlier this month I was playing this game with my friends and we were really going after stuff tooth and nail, can stiffen the spine like just a little bit. And I really do think it can help people remember that you don't always have to compromise all the way.
And games in particular are kind of interesting in that it's kind of something we do as kids that is not necessarily like as regimented by kind of society's rules and society. Like like production rules. But in the past, my impression was that as you grew up and you became more of, you started to fit more into what capitalism expected of you, you kind of lost that. But now it
Mhm.
seems games are becoming part of adults' lives and are
Oh
becoming
yeah.
more prevalent. Do you think that's just kind of, that's like as some kind of rebellion about against kind of established about what society wants out of people, or is just capitalism like doing its thing and like uh, killing the soul or something else we love?
Well, you can never underestimate the ability of capitalism to do its thing because
Mm.
it will always do that, and you always have to contend with it. But I think that the impulse of adults to get back into gaming or to get, for in a lot of cases, get into this kind of gaming for the first time. I mean, so many of the people I've played these games with have never done anything like this.
Mm.
I think that it is a really wonderful escape from both the strictures of work and like the demands of capitalism. And these types of games in particular, I really, really love because the reason that they fell out of favor for a long time is because they don't make like if you're a big publishing company, publishing role playing games is a great way to lose a lot of money.
Mm.
And that's what there was like the sort of golden age of role playing games in the late '70s, early '80s, and the market shrank a lot because with the exception of like Dungeons and Dragons and the really really big name stuff, like it's just not sustainable on like a large scale. And so people forgot about it and it became uncool. And it's like, but you when you get older, you realize like, oh, just because something isn't profitable for a big company doesn't mean it's not awesome. And I would say that one of the things that I really, really love about these types of games as a medium is that they don't make anybody any money, and they cost so little money for you and your friends to have so much fun because you can buy the PDF of Comrades for like $15. There's other games out there that you can get for $10 or $5 or even free, just like big, complicated, awesome games, and you and your friends can just have like hours and hours and hours of fun. And I've done the math sometimes. Like I spent $30 on that rule book, and then my friends and I played, like 50 hours of game based on it. It's just like how many pennies per hour everybody's fun was, and it's amazing. Just like this is like the cheapest way to have fun with your friends. If you compare it to like the cost of like going out to a movie or going out drinking or like God forbid buying like the new $60 game from EA or whatever. It's just like this stuff is just so cheap and it's adaptable and it can really be whatever you want it to be. And so in that sense, I think it's just a wonderful rebellion against capitalist entertainment structures because it's just like cheap and flimsy and weird and fun. It's just there for you and your friends. It costs almost no money.
And it's kind of much more active and involved that the most of the media we consume. We are usually just passive agents receiving media in mass. So yeah, I think it has a really interesting potential.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about these games is that like spend 3 to 5 hours sitting around with your friends playing with these games, any type of role playing game about any topic that interests you. I mean, that's 3 to 5 hours where you're probably not looking at your phone. You're not looking at a TV, and that I think that's part of the thing that has fueled the revival of this type of gaming so much is that it is so the opposite of the type of media we usually consume, and it engages your brain in a really intense way to the point that often, like after running a session, when I get home, I'm exhausted because my brain has been working so hard. I mean, it's really just the opposite of like sitting and staring at your phone and like flipping or like playing Candy Crush or whatever. And I think that people really, really respond to that and like will walk out of a session playing a game like this just feeling lighter than air because their brain is suddenly working in a way that it doesn't always get to. And I think that's a powerful thing.
And also that is it's an activity inherently like communal. You have to do it in group. You have to like, and involves like a lot of interactions, like a lot of human relationships. And I think my impression is that we've maybe lost a lot of like communal enjoyment of things, like communal experiences.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and it's you have to do it. I mean, you can play over Skype or whatever, and there are actually some very interesting single player role player games, which is sort of its own thing. But in general, I mean, it works best when you and your friends make the time. You get together, You get some food, you get some beer on the table, or tea or coffee or whatever, and it's just hanging out, and that's just such like a wonderful thing to get to do. I mean, it's so special.
So, in what ways does Comrades specifically achieve this goal, this feat of awakening revolutionary consciousness in people?
Well, I talked a little bit about the manifesto, and I really do think that is a powerful thing to get people to take this back out into the real world. But then also, I think because it's based on the Apocalypse World engine, which is all about empowering players to demand the game do what they want, and build the game that they want to play. And so that means that the players are not just creating the characters, but are via what is effectively group improv sessions, designing the world together, and really directing the flow of the game. It means that players are literally being given control over this world, and they're being given control over their time. And I think that once you give people an area where it's you're in complete control of this, you get to say how you have fun, you get to have input into where the story goes, although obviously the other players, the non-player characters and the dice will get to have a big say too. Nobody ever gets to make things easier for themselves because God forbid, that would be boring. But I think that once it's so freeing for players to get to have that agency, it certainly makes them better role players. And I think that I think it could definitely make you demand that agency in other areas of your life as well, which is a pretty revolutionary thing.
I definitely agree. So how was the process of analyzing revolutionary history to try to translate it into a game? How did you do that? How was the process? How did you what parts of history did you especially wanted to bring?
Well, mostly the answer is it was a lot of fun, because these all of the there's a big sort of recommended read back with 6 really cool books that were given me by my brother, including this one, WESTSIDE England, The Angry Brigade, really cool book. But so shout out to Caldwell, he's the best. He has a great library. But they're all the kinds of books that I love reading anyway. So the research part was, those are the best sorts of creative projects, the ones where the research is something you'd like to be reading anyway. Because otherwise you're torturing yourself. And so the research component was just literally just a delight. I just had so much fun. I got to read some books about the French Revolution. I don't know about the French Revolution. Just going in and digging through that, reading more about that. And those 2 great the biographies of Stalin and Lenin I talked about before. So that was the research half, which was fairly painless and a lot of fun. And then once I got to actually kind of building this into a game, I fell into what was a really interesting pitfall that I did not expect, where I was hanging out with my players and I was like, listen, what setting are you interested in? Because that's where you always want to start with a PbtA game. What is the world you want to change? And a lot of people who were playing Comrades, they were interested in doing something near future in the place where they live, which is one of the things I think is coolest about this. I've gotten a lot of reports back from people who are, if they live in Detroit, they want to play a game set in Detroit 5 years in the future, where they're fighting fascists in the streets. Something that feels very immediate and very real. And I was like, that's awesome. Let's get into that. That's so cool. And so we built up this whole setting of New York in 2025, and the city had seceded from the country, and there were all these different factions fighting for control. And we were so hyped about this campaign where it was going to just be literally set in the neighborhood where we live, and we're going to be just causing trouble at the deli we go to, and at the Brooklyn Public Library, and really using all these real locations that we know so well. And we ran 2 or 3 sessions like that, and they were very flat. And I kept just trying to throw as much conflict at my players and just trouble at them as I can, because it's your job as GM is to just make trouble. And no matter what I did, they would respond by trying to circulate a petition, letter writing campaign, maybe making some signs, going to see their somebody in the mayor's office or something. And I was just is the game I made just so boring? What is the matter here? And for our group, and this is not the case for every group, for our group, the problem ended up being that we made something so close to home that it was hard for people to disconnect and to really enter into the heightened reality that you want in a gaming setup. Even if it's one that's supposed to deal with real ideas and real people, it still needs to be heightened, otherwise you can't play. And so people were just too handcuffed by the things that handcuff them in real life, which is need to always be 100% reasonable and never make any demand that somebody else might think is a little bit outrageous. And so I ended up ripping up that setting. Although I set aside a lot of the stuff, I might end up making one of the stretch goals for the campaign is I'm going to do that as like a one sheet because the world is still really cool. And I think for certain groups it could work great. And I was like, you know what? The thing that inspired me to do this was just like your sort of classic textbook revolutionary setting, which is like Russia during the February Revolution when nobody knows what's going to happen. And there's a million different people all shouting to have their ideas heard. And everything is still open and up and like, people like there's all that possibility in the air. So I made a fictional setting, which is in the book called Crash 1915, which is sort of a fictional Eastern Europe, like dying Eastern European empire, where everything's up for grabs. Like the Germans are at the gates and society is collapsing and whatever kind of like stripe of leftist revolutionary organization your characters want to build up, like those could be the people who win the day. And as soon as I let my players loose on that, they just went hog wild. In the first session, they hijacked a train, and they drove it off a bridge, and it like crashed into the frozen river, and they like started a riot. And I was like, yes, sorry, this is what I was looking for. And since then, it really, really clicked. So that was the biggest breakthrough for me in terms of designing the game was not requiring because the setting is up to your players and like up to whatever they're interested in, but giving them the option to, if they want, just play like a sort of classic, like exactly what you imagine in your head revolutionary setting, because once you give people that and it's a little bit familiar but a little bit weird, they go hog wild with it and have so much fun.
How do you allow players to develop their own revolution the way they want it, when the way according to the ideals their characters pursue?
So that was one of my biggest sort of projects with the game, because I didn't want, at least maybe it's just my group, maybe it's just the way I run the game, but I feel like when I play any kind of role-playing game, players tend to solve problems in the quickest way they can, which is usually violent. And that's a thing that after a while in RPGs tends to, at best, exhaust me, and at worst make me like really, really uncomfortable. Some of the most fun I've ever had playing an RPG is playing Pendragon, which is a really cool game because it really demands players start from the position of like, you are a knight and you are moral. And it's the only game I've ever played where my group like really bought into that whole hog, and suddenly they would spend the whole game just going around trying to do good things. And I just thought that was beautiful, and it was just a really lovely way to like spend an afternoon. And so seeing that was possible, I wanted to not require, but at least give players the options to, win the game or at least advance the story in many different ways. So I created a system called the Pathways to Revolution, which lets the players, based on your actions in game, at the end of each session, you get to make certain rolls, which are all key to the stats, that will like advance you along one of 5 different tracks, and you can advance more than one at once. And there are things like Force, which is for people who are just like out there cracking skulls, or Mayhem, which is for people who are relying on indiscriminate violence. But then there's also Organization, which is for people who are out there like who are doing like my players wanted to when they first got their hands on the game, which is like hand out leaflets, make speeches, like sign people up, like get people on board in a more legalistic way. And Zealotry, which is for people who are all about like mass demonstrations and just like taking to the streets, not necessarily in a violent way. And then the 5th one is Fellowship, which is all about esprit de corps and like operating in secret as like a tiny conspiratorial cabal. And so the idea with that is that you've got these 5 different pathways, all of which are have equal potential for success, however you define success, or certainly for advancing the plot. And at the end of each pathway, you get an opportunity to stage a revolution in the way that is key to your behavior. And my hope is that in each group, people will be playing as their particular character, as their own particular idea of how this should happen. And, if one person is more interested in stuff that would trigger advancement in Force, and another person is more interested in stuff that would trigger advancement in Organization, that those characters will then butt heads. Because, the story that recurs in every story about every revolutionary group is infighting, factionalism, and people getting really, really angry at each other over perhaps very minor ideological points. And I think that's so cool and so real and so fun. And so I wanted to build a system that both gave you the opportunity to win the game your own way, so that at the end of it, if you want to, if you work really, really hard and you really believe that like this revolution should happen without bloodshed, you can do that. And I think that's very important to have that option, even if there are times in the game when that is not the easiest way. Like if that's the path you want to walk, I think that's very noble and important. And I really wanted the game to give you a chance. But then also that provides space for ideological conflict, which is so central and so fun. And, my hope is, in a perfect session, the action is going to stop for at least 15 or 20 minutes so that two characters on the opposite ends of this can just scream at each other.
Yeah.
Like that's how I know Comrades is working.
Yeah, that has never happened in the left. That's just that's fiction.
Yeah, I totally imagined all that.
So, on the other side, what in the game, what are the threats the players must face? What are the obstacles in their way to revolution?
So it starts off with, you sit down at the table, and as GM, you're supposed to come in with no seriously fixed ideas about what kind of session you want to run. And the first thing you do is you just want to talk to your players about, like, what about the world makes you angry? Like, why are you dissatisfied politically? Like, what is it that's got your blood up? And then sort of through like group discussion, like just generate a lot of different ideas along with the characters and setting and everything. And there's a lot of stuff in the book about how to have that conversation and still have it be focused, because you don't want it to just devolve into chit chat. You can do that for free at the bar. And then the GM's job is to take that stuff home and craft it into something that can actually be played. So I leaned on what are in Apocalypse World called threats, and Dungeon World are called fronts. I call them fronts because that terminology has always made a lot of sense to me, which are basically ways of building out dangers or threats or obstacles in a way where if the players do not stop it this week, it will advance. And so when you write a front in this game or in Dungeon World or whatever, what you're doing is you're writing whatever the obstacle is or the danger, the thing that is going to destroy the world, and you write out what are the 7 or 8 steps it'll take if unopposed, which really appeals to me because that really keys into deep into just how dramatic storytelling works. Because before you write a story, you have to know what's the bad guy going to do if the hero doesn't stop him. So in a classic setting of Comrades, the kinds of things they would be fighting are, and these are recommended in the manual: secret police, the regular police, the army, the right, supposed enemies within the left, and just about anybody else who takes issue with somebody who's out there saying, like, I have an idea to change the world, which is everyone. So there's a lot of examples in the book that key on like forces of riot police, like hunting down demonstrators, or secret police moles infiltrating underground operations, which is a very rich theme that can be mined throughout history. So those are like the sort of classic obstacles, because those are the ones that I draw on from history. But I think because it's all based on what the players are interested in, you could, however you dream it up, it's up to the GM to then say, like, okay, so you've talked to me about this world that you guys want to play in, and I'm going to figure out who are the most dangerous things in it that are going to be trying to destroy you and trying to make the world someplace that you do not want to live in. So they can take other forms, but there's a lot of fighting for police in this book.
Nice. So something that tends to happen in revolutions is that they can degenerate or into movements somehow opposed to the ideas they once represented, or at least in action, in the things that people end up doing are opposed to their ideals. Is that represented in the game somehow, that tension of maintaining their ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there are base mechanical ways for that, like I was talking earlier, and particularly with the force pathway. The farther you go down that, the more likely it is that your movement is going to start to look like how you would imagine a sort of classic fascist party. And that's up to the GM and the players, like how hard they want to lean on that, and like how hard they want to interrogate that. But I think that if you're out there preaching something idealistic, but you're mostly expressing that by hunting people down and beating them up in the street, perhaps you have gone down the wrong path. So there are like mechanical things in there where it is supposed to feel problematic in a way that the GM and the players are told to not shy away from, to talk about, to embrace, and like dig into. And then also the GM is told at every turn, like one of the GM principles is that you should question their ideology, test their ideology, like make them prove that they believe what they say they believe, and to like don't let them get away with it. The same way that the players are told not to let the bastards get away with it, it's up to the GM to force the players to hold themselves to a highest standard possible, and to recognize if their movement has spun off the rails, and to deal with the consequences of that, because that's absolutely a thing that can and does happen, and it's something I wanted to be able to sort of replicate and interrogate here. You know, I was talking earlier about the tendency of most RPGs to devolve into like senseless violence, you know, about like the murder hobo stereotype. And I think it's really interesting how those tendencies that feel so natural in like a fantasy or a sci-fi setting, as soon as you put them into a real world setting, are extremely problematic and demand serious thought. And so I hope that I've baked enough into the game that you know, it's like, if your players want to play this like a typical RPG, they totally can, and they'll have a lot of fun, but they don't always seem to feel good about it. It says in the introduction, this is a game where no death, even that of a villain, should go unmourned. I believe very firmly in the thing that Raymond Chandler said about Dashiell Hammett, which is that he wrote like pain, hurt, and life mattered. And I hope that this game is being run by people in the same spirit, because if your players do spin off into doing things that in real life they would consider immoral, you need to draw attention to that, you need to talk about it, and like figure out what that means for the game and what it means for you, because those are important conversations to have. But it's also fun.
Which is a really good way to get people to talk about it.
I hope so, yeah.
What sort of lessons or from history do you wanted to bring attention to the game? What sort of things or ideas or methodology or whatever did you wanted to the game to reflect and to make people like think about them?
I think the most important one is fighting.
Sorry, I lost you there for a little bit. Could you?
Yeah, am I coming in and out? How am I now?
It's fine. Okay.
Better?
I think so.
Okay.
So yeah.
This would be a wonderful time for my internet to cut out. The internet not great. But so I think the most important one is the idea of infighting that we talked about earlier. One of the things I love about the PbtA system, and the reason that this was the one that I reached for, was because the mechanics of the way that the players interact, and you know, every game has their own name for it, whether it's history or bond or strings and monster hearts or whatever. In Comrades, I call it bond. It encourages players to, if not go full player versus player, to always like be butting heads. And they're like mechanical ways that players are encouraged to butt heads. And so it was really, I love the idea that you could use those to replicate, like we were talking about before, the less natural tendency towards infighting, towards splitting, and to have that in a game where suddenly it's not only an intellectual point, but it's a thing that's actually impeding your group's progress toward whatever your stated goal is in that session. So it's a system that's designed to force people to first butt heads and then set that aside or paper over it long enough to get done what they need to get done, but for those riffs to just always erupt over and over and over again, just the way they do in real life. And again, that's a thing that the GM is encouraged to prod that wound as often as possible.
How do characters evolve through the process of playing the game? How do they change? In what mechanical ways is that reflected?
It as always, it's whatever direction the character. So I leaned on the Dungeon World has a fail forward mechanic where you gain experience points whenever you botch a roll. I was really like that on a sort of just like dramatic structure level. It really appeals to me. And so every time you botch a roll, you get experience. And so players can use that to pick up other moves, to take moves from other playbooks, the same as you can in other PbtA games. But as players like get deeper into this, as characters get deeper into this, they're also encouraged to sort of take time to just like sit back and like reflect on what they've done, positively or negatively, and like really think about it. There's a spot on the back of your sheet for character history, so you can be recording awesome stuff you did or not so awesome stuff you did there. And as always, the most important thing is your relationship to the other people at the table and the other characters at the table. And so it is like really heavily encouraged that those relationships evolve over time, and that you really keep track of that and treasure it, or malign it, depending on like how you relate to them.
In what games do characters in the game, and I guess players through them, can find the hope to kind of keep fighting to continue pursuing their ideals?
So at the end of each session, it actually says in there, like, take a moment to reflect on victory, tragic defeat, because you really are in this game always encouraged to be like in it, but then later to take moments to like step back and look at it. And it's the thing that you do around the table anytime you play a game. At the end of the session, you're always like, oh my God, that was so awesome when you did that. Or like, oh my God, we screwed up so bad when we did that. And in this game, it's institutionalized in those pathways to revolution, because that's the first step, and then making the roles that hopefully advance you along the track. So being reflective like that, and thinking really hard about like what you're doing and where you're taking the revolution, where you're taking your character, is like how you progress in the game.
Cool. And what kind of how's the ending of this revolution? What kind of conclusions can it happen? What kind of things the game can evolve it? Like, what does it mean to feel the revolutionary track?
Mm-hmm. Well, so it is deliberately vague, because all you get at the end of the track is you get a so basically it says that at the end of, like, in the next session, like once you get to level 5 track, that means that next session you guys get a chance to seize power. It could be through massive demonstrations that you hopefully will inspire the leader of the country to flee. It could be through like an assassination plot. It could be through like whatever the track is that you've been advancing along. It's something key to that. But all that means is the GM is instructed to set up a situation where you guys have a chance. And then after that, it's up to you. And if you know anything about both like revolutionary history and then also just like how things go in role-playing games, probably you're going to screw it up real bad, because that's how these games are designed, and it's like, in theory, it's kind of late game, so you've got like fairly high stats, although there's a pretty high attrition rate in this game, so you might be playing with relatively fresh characters by the end of it. So you're still like, if you're rolling a lot of 6s and lower, like you're in deep trouble, and it's all on. And so it says in the rule book, like, this could be the last session, or it could be the last session of this season, and then you go on to start over, because like just because you guys get a shot at seizing power, it could go horribly wrong. And so that's an opportunity for the GM, depending on how the story goes, and obviously depending on whether or not the players are still interested in it. If everything just goes totally pear-shaped, at the end of it, he can be like, okay, so your coup failed horribly. Way to go, that was a disaster. And now the far right wing, like military party, has seized power. You guys have been driven into hiding. You thought it was bad at the start of this game. It's so much worse now. And then you've got, kick off for like what in a TV show would be season 2. So it is, the end of the track is not necessarily the end of the story unless the players want it to be, and then it could be, because you could fail and just sort of agree as a group. Like, it seems like probably we're all going to get executed, and I think that's the end of the story, and that could be where it ends as well. Because again, this game is fun. I have flirted with the idea of just continuing to follow the classic structure of the Russian Revolution. I like the idea of doing an expansion someday called Comrades Civil War, which is all about like, you tried to seize power, it kind of worked, it almost worked, it halfway worked, it really didn't. And now the country is in a state of civil war. What are you going to do now? So it would be similar dynamics, but in a different setting, or different circumstance. I've told you exactly now all of the idea I have for that. So we're still a very long way from that becoming a real thing. I've done the thing I always do, which is I have cover art in mind, which is such a stupid way to design games, because I see the cover, I'm like, ooh, and then I like make the cover, and I'm like, this is great, and then I spend a year being like, this game I thought of doesn't work at all, but I have this cool cover and I feel really bad about it. So I'm fighting the urge to download the image I looked at and turn it into a cool looking cover, because I don't necessarily think that would help, but perhaps someday.
Another big aspect of most PbtA games is the archetypes, the playbooks.
Yeah.
How did you go about deciding which playbooks to include? What you wanted to focus with each of them? What playbooks do we have?
Well, yeah, all right. So we've got sort of a wide range, and this was another part where like this part was just so fun. I just had so much fun with this. Half of it was ideas that just came to me while I was thinking up the game. Actually, I did a lot of the work on the playbooks while working shifts at the Park Slope Food Co-op, which is a wonderful sort of modern socialist setting to be working on this kind of thing. So I'd be like checking people out when it was slow. I'd be like making notes on my notepad. So we have archetypes like stuff that you would think of, like there's a soldier, student, worker, but then also stuff that has potential to get a little bit more problematic. Like there's a demagogue, there's a propagandist, so there are all the different types of people who you see recurring throughout revolutionary history who are in it because they believe in it 100%, or maybe they're in it because they see something for themselves. And that's another place for conflict to sprout at the table. My favorite playbook might be, and this is certainly one that's popular at the table, is called The Professional. This is the one I had last. And it's a revolutionary archetype that you don't see as much, but when he does pop up in your history book or in your movie or whatever, he or she is a lot of fun. And that's the professional revolutionary who's like been in all these different wars, and he's seen things and he's got skills. And so this is a guy who kind of looks down on all the people there because it's like, this is your first revolution. Okay, I've been here before. But then it's also set apart from them because he might have like a mercenary spirit, or he might just be like too hardened by the things that he has seen out in the world. And that's a playbook where that character just causes trouble. Because that's probably one of the best fighters at the table. And, when you pair them with another playbook, like, say, the artist or the student, which tends towards more idealistic or, intellectual, there's just, like, such wonderful built-in conflict because those are two people who really, really need each other and really, really don't like each other, which is the essence of all conflict and the kinds of great stories you can get with this game and other games like it. I just had so much fun writing the playbooks, coming up with moves, coming up with probably slightly too clever for my own good names for all of them, making all of the character art and everything. It was just like every step of it was just a joy, and I really hope that comes through in the text because it was so much fun to work on.
I'm sure it does. I kind of with the finishing questions, kind of what is some interesting historical fact or a story that you found out in the process of researching for the game that you think is really cool or really interesting or really fun, or you just feel like sharing it?
So one thing that I read a lot about, which is the thing that I've known about and is fascinating for me a long time, is Trotsky's armored train. Have you read anything about this? So during the Russian Civil War, Trotsky had an armored train, which had it was just like fully outfitted as like a mobile propaganda center. So it had like printing presses on board. I think it had a radio station. It had like a telegraph on board. It had just everything he needed to do, so he could just be rushing all around the whole country, spreading propaganda and like trying to keep the Red Army together. And I think that would be an amazing setting for like a one shot. Say you do jump ahead of me and you go right straight to the Civil War setting. Like if you want to be playing as a gang of like disaffected anarchists, like where Nestor Makhno and his like anarchist gang, like trying to fight the whites and the Red Army at the same time, and you want to, I just think destroy Trotsky's train, steal Trotsky's train, something like that. I think would just be an excellent setting for a one shot. It's something I've before because it's just such a wild, real thing. It's worth looking up because I'm sure I've remembered the details wrong, but I've never seen pictures of it. But God, I bet it was weird. Yeah.
Cool. And to kind of get a feel for how the game plays out, could you tell us some cool story you've gotten out of playing the game? Something short that you think is so representative of the game?
Yeah, there was a great session I ran with my group. So we ran a whole campaign set in Fresh just so I could really flesh out the setting that comes with the book. And we ran a great session where the setup was that the Grand Duke, the brother of the Empress, was preparing to take charge of the army. And, because the army was like in total shambles and this sort of like pseudo-militaristic buffoon wanted to go out and take control of it. So he was having a huge party at his estate just outside of town to celebrate. And so the crew rolls up, and 4 of the 5 players immediately get totally sidetracked with their own ridiculous stuff. One person is like fall in love with an opera singer. Another person is like trying to poison everybody at the party by like, sort of sweet talking the cook and letting them do that. And so everybody's just like completely just like totally in the tar pit, just like sinking deeper and deeper and deeper. And one player was playing, I think actually as the professional. And she just like immediately zoomed in on the Grand Duke, flirted with him just enough to like get him away from the party, and shot him in the head. And I could see the way that she was going, and when I was running it, I was like, oh my god, she's just going to totally wreck this guy, and that's going to be the end of the session. And so I had to like her gaps in play got longer and longer and longer because I just had to keep spending time with all of the ridiculous stuff that everybody else was doing, because I knew that she was like 3 dramatic beats away from just ending. And so I was like, all right, so let's go back to Brian, who's in the kitchen right now, and he's been told to fillet a fish for some reason, and let's just deal with that for a while. Because with most players, like the more you let them make moves, the deeper they get into trouble and the more story happens. So I love about these settings. But that day, Alicia was just like rolling 12s, and she was on a mission. I was just like, she can't be stopped. And so we sort of saved it to the end, and all of the other players ended up like dead or arrested, and she ended up like hanging off the back of the last train out of the station, just like flicking her cigarette butt at the house with this dead Grand Duke in her wake. It was just like, you won, man, way to go.
Amazing. That's really cool.
It's a fun game. Oh, and the hardback came in yesterday. It looks beautiful.
Oh, nice.
Everybody should take a look.
Cool.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Nice, thick, sturdy. You can hit somebody on the head with it, although I don't recommend that. Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm really just so happy with it. People are really excited about the hardback. It's great.
So yeah, I think I just want to thank you again for coming to the program. Yeah, it was a lot of fun talking with you. And to everyone who's watching it, I totally recommend you go and check out the game and see for yourself. And if you support the game, you can immediately get the rules, the preview for the rules.
As soon as you back it for any amount of money, you can access the first backer update. It's got like a 71-page preview of the book, which is almost half the book. And that's got the Pathways to Revolution that we were talking about. That's got all the playbooks. That's got all the basic moves, everything you need to literally run a session of the game tonight. It also comes with a draft of all of the handouts and the printable playbooks and everything. So you literally could back the game and be running it. I mean, depending on where you are. I know where you are. It's very late. Maybe not tonight, but tomorrow.
So yeah, I totally encourage everyone to go check it out. Support the Kickstarter. Join the revolution. But I do know I am not responsible for anything you do after that. So
no, it's your game. You don't have to tell anybody about it. You can get as weird as you want.
So yeah, thanks everyone, and as always, if you like
Thank you so much,
and if you like the content, you can support us by following us on Twitch, supporting us on Coffee, sharing it around on social media and all that stuff. So thanks everyone for being here. I hope to see all of you soon, and until then, live long and prosper. May the force be with you. Power to the people.
Thank you so much.
Bye.